Do you believe in parallel worlds? What if there are hidden doorways all around us? Invisible thresholds leading to alternate realities where different versions of yourself are living entirely different lives? And what if time itself isn't the straight line we've always assumed, but something far more fluid? Something that can be bent, crossed, or even broken? If you think these ideas belong only in science fiction, then we dare you to explain these 10 documented cases that suggest otherwise. So let's jump straight into the first one. And this first case is absolutely chilling. Number 10. The impossible return of Sergeant Carlos Rivera. What happens when a soldier disappears in the middle of a military exercise and returns hours later claiming he was gone for 3 weeks? That's exactly what allegedly happened in the mountains of northern Argentina in 1983, and the details are deeply unsettling. On the night of September 14, 1983, Sergeant Carlos Rivera was leading a small reconnaissance team through a remote valley in the Andes. The region was notorious for strange lights and unexplained phenomena. But Rivera was a practical man who dismissed such stories as local superstition. His mission was simple: survey the terrain and report back by morning. Around midnight, Rivera's radio went completely silent. His team searched for him frantically, calling his name into the freezing darkness. For the soldiers left behind, approximately 4 hours passed in mounting panic. They found no trace of him whatsoever. No footprints, no equipment, no sign of struggle. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed him whole. Then, just as the first light of dawn touched the peaks, Rivera appeared. He was standing in the exact spot where he had vanished. But something was terribly wrong. His uniform was torn and weathered as if he'd been wearing it for weeks. His beard had grown thick and full. Most disturbing of all, he was clutching a small leather journal filled with entries dated across 21 consecutive days. According to Rivera's account, he had stepped into a strange fog that appeared without warning. When he emerged on the other side, he found himself in the same valley. But everything was different. The sky was a deeper shade of blue. The stars formed unfamiliar patterns, and there were structures in the distance that shouldn't have existed. Massive stone towers that looked ancient yet somehow advanced. For 3 weeks, Rivera wandered this alternate landscape, recording everything he observed. He encountered no other humans, but saw creatures he couldn't identify, flying things that made no sound, shadows that moved against the light. He survived on water from streams that tasted faintly metallic, and plants that glowed softly at night. Then one morning, the fog appeared again. Rivera walked into it without hesitation. Seconds later, he was back in our world, standing before his terrified squad. Only 4 hours had passed for them, but Rivera had aged 3 weeks. The military conducted extensive investigations. Rivera's journal contained detailed descriptions of flora and fauna that matched no known species. His physical condition confirmed extended exposure to harsh elements. Psychological evaluations found no evidence of deception or mental illness. He simply could not explain how he had lived 3 weeks in 4 hours. Some researchers who later examined the case believe Rivera didn't travel through time at all. Instead, they suggest he crossed into a parallel dimension where time flows at a different rate. A place where 3 weeks equaled 4 of our hours. A world existing alongside ours, separated by nothing more than an invisible boundary. The question that haunts investigators to this day remains unanswered. If Rivera could cross over accidentally, how many others have done the same without returning? And how many people reported missing in remote locations actually stepped through doorways we can't see? A deeply unsettling thought. And we're just getting started. Number 9. The woman who remembered a different history. In 2008, a Spanish woman identified only as Lorena Garcia woke up one morning to find that her entire life had changed overnight. Not in dramatic ways at first, but in small, terrifying details that accumulated into an undeniable conclusion. She was no longer in her own world. Lorena's story began with her alarm clock. The sheets on her bed were different, not just moved, but completely unfamiliar. A different color, a different fabric. She assumed someone was playing a prank and went about her morning routine. But the strangeness continued. At work, she discovered she no longer belonged to her department. Her computer login didn't work. Colleagues she had worked with for years acted as if they barely knew her. When she checked company records, she found documentation showing she had transferred to a different division 6 months earlier. A transfer she had no memory of ever requesting or accepting. Then came the truly disturbing revelations. Lorena had been in a relationship with a man named Agustin for several months. They had been discussing moving in together. But in this world, she was still with her ex-boyfriend, a man she had broken up with over 6 months ago. He answered her calls, confused about why she seemed surprised to hear from him. Agustin, meanwhile, didn't exist in any records she could find. Lorena spent weeks desperately searching for evidence of her true life. She found none. Her family confirmed memories she didn't share. Photographs showed her at events she had never attended. News reports mentioned incidents she had never heard of. Small details everywhere reminded her that this wasn't her world. She consulted neurologists, psychiatrists, and sleep specialists. Every test came back normal. She wasn't suffering from amnesia, psychosis, or any identifiable condition. Her memories were consistent, detailed, and emotionally authentic. She simply remembered a different version of reality. What makes Lorena's case particularly fascinating is how specific her displaced memories were. She didn't just feel confused or disoriented. She remembered exact conversations, precise dates, specific sequences of events that never happened in this timeline. Her reality wasn't damaged. It had been replaced. Some theorists believe Lorena experienced what they call spontaneous dimensional transference. The idea suggests that consciousness can sometimes shift between parallel worlds during sleep. When she closed her eyes in her original universe, she opened them in this one, and there was no way back. Lorena never found Agustin. She never recovered her original life. As far as anyone knows, she eventually had to accept that she was now living in a world that wasn't quite her own. A world where everyone she knew remembered a different woman. A woman who looked like her, sounded like her, but had lived an entirely different life. The most terrifying implication of her story is this. If it happened to Lorena, it could happen to anyone. You could wake up tomorrow in a world almost identical to this one. Almost. And you might never know for certain whether you had always been here or whether you had crossed over from somewhere else. Would you even notice the small differences? Or would you simply adjust and forget? Who knows? Number 8. The Tokyo train station incident. What if an entire group of people shared the impossible experience of being transported to a parallel version of their own city? That's exactly what allegedly happened at Shinjuku Station in Tokyo during the summer of 2011. And the accounts from witnesses are absolutely fascinating. On a humid July evening, a crowded subway car was traveling between stations when the tunnel lights flickered violently. Passengers reported a sensation unlike anything they had experienced before. A sudden pressure in their chests, a ringing in their ears, the feeling that the air itself had become somehow thicker. When the train emerged into the next station, approximately 30 passengers noticed something was wrong immediately. The station signs were written in a script that looked like Japanese, but contained unfamiliar characters. The advertisements on the walls promoted companies nobody recognized. The other passengers on the platform wore clothing that seemed subtly different from current fashion. More muted colors, strange geometric patterns. For approximately 3 minutes, these 30 passengers experienced what they described as a parallel Tokyo. The architecture was the same, but details were different. A building that should have been blue was green. A famous billboard was advertising something called Nozomi Electronics, a company that doesn't exist in our world. The train schedules showed routes to stations with unfamiliar names. Then the lights flickered again. The pressure returned, and when it passed, everything was normal. The signs were readable. The companies were familiar. The other passengers looked ordinary. Those 3 minutes had seemingly never happened. What makes this case compelling is the number of witnesses who corroborated each other's accounts. 30 strangers, interviewed separately, described nearly identical experiences. They agreed on which advertisements were different. They agreed on the strange writing. They agreed on the feeling of pressure and disorientation. The statistical likelihood of 30 people independently fabricating the same detailed hallucination is essentially zero. Investigators who studied the incident proposed several theories. Some suggested the group had experienced a collective hallucination triggered by electromagnetic interference in the tunnel. Others believed they had briefly slipped into a parallel dimension, a Tokyo that existed alongside ours but had developed differently. Perhaps in that world, Nozomi Electronics was a major corporation. Perhaps the writing system had evolved along different lines. The most unsettling detail came from one witness who had taken a photograph during the 3 minutes. When he checked his phone afterward, the image showed only the normal station with normal signs. But he clearly remembered photographing the strange characters. Either his phone had reverted along with reality, or his memory of taking the photo belonged to the parallel world. That was only the beginning of the truly mind-bending cases. What's coming next will challenge everything you thought you understood about the nature of time itself. Number 7. The man who built a portal in his basement. This mysterious man, known publicly only by his initial E, claims to have constructed a device in rural Pennsylvania that can open doorways to parallel dimensions, and his descriptions of what lies beyond are absolutely extraordinary. E's story began in 2003 when he was conducting experiments with electromagnetic fields in his basement workshop. He wasn't trying to build a portal. He was working on an unconventional energy source inspired by the writings of Nikola Tesla. But what he allegedly created was something far more profound. According to E, the device consists of rotating magnetic drums surrounded by copper coils arranged in a very specific geometric pattern. When activated, the drums generate an oscillating field that creates what E describes as a visible distortion in the air. A shimmering, oval-shaped area approximately 2 meters tall that shows images of somewhere else entirely. E claims he has looked through this portal over 200 times. On the other side, he sees variations of his own basement. In some versions, the room is empty and abandoned. In others, it's filled with equipment far more advanced than anything he possesses. Occasionally, he sees himself, different versions of himself standing on the other side, looking back with expressions ranging from curiosity to terror. He has never stepped through. E insists the portal is strictly one way in terms of physical matter. Objects thrown into the distortion simply vanish and never appear on the other side. But visual information and sound can travel both ways. He has heard conversations in languages he doesn't recognize. He has seen skies through basement windows that were the wrong color, orange, deep purple, once entirely black with no visible sun. What makes E's claims particularly interesting is the detailed technical documentation he's produced: schematics, frequency calculations, lists of materials. Several independent electronics experts who reviewed his plans acknowledged that while unconventional, they contained nothing obviously impossible. The physics was unusual but not incoherent. E warns that attempting to replicate his device would be extremely dangerous. He describes instances where the portal showed what he calls hostile dimensions, places where the air itself seemed toxic, where shapes moved in the darkness that were clearly not human, where his other selves were dead, their bodies visible in the abandoned basements. Is E genuinely looking into parallel worlds from his Pennsylvania basement? Or is he an elaborate fabricator with unusual technical knowledge? The question remains unanswered. But if his claims contain even a fragment of truth, then the boundaries between dimensions may be far thinner than we've ever imagined, and the technology to pierce them may already exist. Number 6. The ancient manuscript that described our future. Deep in the restricted archives of a European university lies a medieval document that has baffled scholars for decades. Written in the 12th century, it contains descriptions of events that wouldn't occur for another 800 years. Either its author could see the future, or they had somehow traveled there and returned. The manuscript is attributed to a monk known only as Brother Marcus, who lived in a remote monastery in what is now southern Germany. According to monastery records, Marcus was considered unusual even by his contemporaries. He would fall into trance states that lasted for days. When he emerged, he would write frantically, filling pages with detailed visions. Most of his writings were typical religious prophecy, vague and symbolic, but several passages are startlingly specific. He describes metal birds carrying hundreds of people across vast oceans, tiny boxes that display moving pictures and allow instant communication across any distance. A great war between nations that kills millions using weapons that split apart the very essence of matter. His description of what historians believe is the atomic bomb includes details about the mushroom-shaped cloud and the flash that is brighter than the sun. Even more unsettling are his descriptions of events that haven't happened yet. Marcus writes about a plague that silences the world's cities, forcing people to cover their faces and avoid contact with one another. Many researchers note the striking parallels to recent global events. He also describes a great fire in the sky that changes the weather for years afterward. And most cryptically, he writes about the year when humanity discovers they are not alone, though they wished they had never known. Some scholars dismiss the manuscript as a clever forgery, possibly created in the 19th or 20th century and planted in the archives. But extensive analysis of the parchment, ink, and binding techniques confirms medieval origin. The document is genuinely 800 years old. Others propose that Marcus wasn't predicting the future at all, but rather viewing it. His trance states may have been episodes of temporal displacement, moments when his consciousness slipped forward in time. He saw our world and tried to describe it using the only vocabulary and concepts available to a 12th century monk. The monastery where Marcus lived was built on a location the local population had considered sacred for thousands of years. Ancient Celtic rituals were reportedly performed there involving stone circles and specific astronomical alignments. Perhaps the site itself served as some kind of temporal thin spot, a location where the boundaries of time were weaker than elsewhere. Brother Marcus eventually stopped writing. According to records, he emerged from his final trance in a state of profound distress. He spoke of having seen something he called the ending, though he refused to describe it further. He burned many of his own manuscripts and spent his remaining years in silence. What he saw that terrified him so deeply remains unknown. If you're enjoying this exploration of impossible mysteries, we'd really appreciate a like and a subscription. It helps us bring you more content like this. And trust us, what's coming next makes everything before it seem tame in comparison. Number 5. The quantum experiment that opened a doorway. In 1997, a classified physics experiment allegedly went terribly wrong at a research facility in northern Canada. What began as an attempt to study quantum tunneling ended with researchers witnessing something that shouldn't exist, a visible tear in the fabric of reality itself. The experiment involved bombarding a specially constructed chamber with precisely calibrated particles. The goal was to observe quantum effects at scales larger than previously achieved. According to leaked documents, the team succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, and it nearly cost them everything. During the crucial test sequence, instruments detected energy readings that exceeded theoretical maximums by a factor of thousands. The air inside the chamber began to distort visibly. Researchers watching through reinforced glass described seeing the distortion solidify into something resembling a window, roughly rectangular, hanging in space without any visible support. Through this window, they saw another laboratory. It was similar to their own, but clearly different. The equipment was more advanced. The walls were a different color, and there were people on the other side, wearing lab coats of an unfamiliar design, staring back at them with expressions of shock. For approximately 90 seconds, the two realities were connected. Researchers on both sides attempted communication. Sound passed through imperfectly, distorted and echoing, but fragments were audible. The figures in the other laboratory were speaking English, but with accents and vocabulary that seemed slightly wrong. They mentioned dates that hadn't occurred yet. They referenced historical events that had never happened in our timeline. Then the energy readings spiked beyond sustainable levels. The equipment began to fail. The window collapsed inward with a sound described as reality screaming. When the emergency lights came on, 3 researchers were unconscious. One was bleeding from his ears, and all monitoring equipment had been destroyed. The facility was immediately shut down. All participants signed extensive non-disclosure agreements. The official record states the experiment was abandoned due to equipment failure, but several researchers have spoken anonymously about what they witnessed. One scientist described the experience as looking into a mirror that showed what you could have been. The parallel laboratory seemed more successful, more advanced. Their equipment was better designed. Their methodology was more refined. It was as if the other timeline had made different choices and progressed further. But what truly disturbed the researchers was a final detail they only realized later. When reviewing their memories of the other laboratory, they realized the date visible on a wall calendar showed a year 30 years in the future. The parallel dimension wasn't just a different version of reality. It was ahead of us in time. The experiment has never been repeated, at least not officially. But rumors persist of similar research being conducted at facilities around the world. Attempts to replicate the conditions that created the window. Efforts to establish lasting contact with parallel timelines. And perhaps, some whisper, attempts to cross through. Number 4. The village that vanished into another dimension. In the mountain regions of central China, there's a valley that locals have avoided for generations. They call it the Valley of the Lost. And they claim that an entire village once disappeared there, swallowed by forces that took them somewhere beyond our world. The story dates back to 1937. A village of approximately 300 residents existed in this remote valley, isolated from the chaos of the wider world. They were farmers and craftspeople, living much as their ancestors had for centuries. Then, over the course of a single night, they vanished without explanation. Military officials who investigated the disappearance found something extraordinary. The village was still there. Every building stood intact. Every possession remained in place. Food was still on tables. Tools lay where they had been dropped. Animals wandered freely, confused but unharmed. Only the people were gone. 300 men, women and children had simply ceased to exist. No bodies were ever found. No evidence of violence or natural disaster. No signs of mass exodus. Their footprints in the muddy paths simply ended, as if the villagers had stepped out of reality itself. The military sealed the valley and classified all documentation, but witnesses among the soldiers later described strange phenomena in the area. Lights that moved against the wind. Sounds like distant singing from no identifiable source. The sensation of being watched by something invisible. Modern investigators who have studied available records propose a disturbing theory. The valley sits on a geographic location with unusual magnetic properties. Ancient structures nearby suggest the site was considered spiritually significant for thousands of years. Perhaps the valley serves as a natural portal, a location where the barrier between dimensions is permanently thin. According to this theory, something changed on that night in 1937. Perhaps an astronomical alignment. Perhaps accumulated energy reaching a critical threshold. Whatever the trigger, the portal opened wide enough to swallow an entire community. The villagers didn't die. They were transported, alive and intact, into a parallel dimension. If this theory is correct, the village may still exist somewhere. 300 people, or their descendants, living in a world alongside ours. They might have adapted to their new reality, built new lives, created their own explanation for what happened. And they might still be trying to find a way back. The valley remains officially restricted to this day. Those who have entered it illegally report unsettling experiences. Electronics malfunction inexplicably. Compasses spin wildly. Visitors feel an overwhelming urge to leave, as if something is pushing them away. Whatever opened in 1937 may not have fully closed. But here's where things get truly unsettling. Number 3. The Secret Government Timeline Project. According to multiple whistleblowers over several decades, various governments have been actively researching time travel and dimensional crossing since the late 1940s, and they may have succeeded far more than the public knows. The most detailed accounts come from individuals claiming to have worked on a program allegedly called Project Looking Glass. According to these sources, the project developed technology capable of viewing events at different points in the timeline, not physically traveling through time, but observing it from a distance. A temporal telescope, looking forward and backward through history. One alleged scientist described the device as creating a spherical distortion field approximately 3 meters in diameter. When properly calibrated, this sphere would display images from other times. They reportedly observed historical events with perfect clarity. Battles, coronations, natural disasters, private moments in the lives of ordinary people from centuries past. But viewing the future proved more complicated. According to these accounts, the timeline ahead was not fixed. The device showed probability clouds, overlapping possibilities that shifted and merged depending on decisions not yet made. Researchers could see likely outcomes, but not guaranteed certainties. The future was written in pencil, constantly being erased and rewritten. What reportedly disturbed project leadership most were the convergence points. These were moments where all timelines seemed to collapse into the same event. Regardless of what decisions were made, certain future occurrences appeared unavoidable, built into the fabric of reality itself. What these convergence points contained has never been disclosed. But whistleblowers suggest that what they showed was deeply troubling. Some researchers allegedly attempted to use the device for more than observation. They experimented with sending information backward, trying to communicate with past versions of themselves. According to one account, they succeeded. Messages were received that had been sent by researchers who had not yet sent them. Paradoxes began to accumulate. Memories of events that had happened and also hadn't happened simultaneously. The project was reportedly shut down in the early 2000s when researchers began experiencing what they called temporal sickness, difficulty distinguishing past from future, memories of multiple contradictory timelines existing simultaneously. Some lost the ability to perceive time linearly at all, experiencing past, present, and future as a single, overwhelming moment. Several alleged participants have died under unusual circumstances, accidents, sudden illnesses, apparent suicides. Skeptics dismiss these deaths as coincidences. Others suggest they are evidence of an active cover-up. Perhaps someone doesn't want the public to know what the timeline truly contains. The question remains, if governments have been viewing the future for decades, what have they seen? What convergence points are approaching? And what decisions are being made right now, behind closed doors, based on knowledge of events that haven't happened yet? A deeply frightening thought. And what's coming next makes this look almost comforting by comparison. Number 2. The ritual that allegedly opened a permanent doorway. In the remote highlands of Peru, there exists a stone gateway that local shamans claim has been active for thousands of years. But according to recent accounts, something happened in 2015 that changed its nature entirely. A ritual was performed that shouldn't have been, and the gateway has not fully closed since. The structure itself is ancient, carved from solid rock in patterns that align with specific stellar positions. For generations, local spiritual practitioners used it for healing ceremonies and communication with ancestral spirits. They believed the gateway connected this world to realms of pure consciousness, but they also believed it should only be opened briefly and with great respect. In 2015, a group of Western occultists allegedly traveled to the site without permission. They had studied ancient texts describing activation rituals and believed they could use the gateway to access other dimensions directly. What they attempted was reportedly far more aggressive than traditional ceremonies. They used frequencies, substances, and invocations designed to force the gateway open rather than requesting passage respectfully. According to witnesses who observed from a distance, the ritual appeared to work. The air within the stone frame began to shimmer. Colors appeared that had no names, hues that seemed to exist outside the normal visual spectrum. The occultists reportedly saw something on the other side. Their accounts varied dramatically. Some described a paradise of impossible beauty. Others spoke of darkness filled with watching shapes. One participant never spoke again afterward. But the critical problem emerged when they attempted to close the gateway. Traditional ceremonies include careful closing protocols. The Western group had not learned these properly. Despite their efforts, the shimmer within the frame did not fully disappear. According to local shamans, it remains visible to this day if you know how to look. A thin place, they call it, where whatever was glimpsed on the other side can still glimpse back. Since 2015, unusual reports have emerged from the region. Travelers who visited the site describe feelings of being observed by something non-human. Photographs taken near the gateway sometimes show distortions, shadows that weren't visible to the eye. Animals avoid the area entirely, and several individuals who touch the gateway stones have reported vivid dreams of places that clearly aren't Earth. Dreams so detailed and consistent that they seem less like imagination and more like memory. The local shamans perform regular containment ceremonies now, trying to reinforce barriers that the Western ritual damaged. They describe their work as holding a door closed that something keeps pushing from the other side. They don't know what the occultists allowed to see through, but they're certain it's still watching, and it's trying to find a way in. Ready for the finale? Then listen closely now, because the final case might be the most disturbing of all. Number 1. The Parallel World Research Station. According to classified documents allegedly leaked in 2019, a joint international research facility has been operating for decades in the Antarctic, studying what scientists there call dimensional bleed. And what they've discovered suggests that our reality is far more fragile than anyone imagines. The station is reportedly located in a region where magnetic anomalies create natural weak points in dimensional barriers. Scientists there have documented over 300 instances of what they term crossover events, moments when objects, signals, or even organisms from parallel dimensions have appeared in our world. The most common crossovers involve simple objects, rocks with impossible mineral compositions, plant specimens from species that don't exist, machine components designed with technology decades ahead of our own. These items appear without warning, usually in a localized area within the station's observation grid, and remain in our dimension permanently. But some crossovers have been far more significant. On at least 7 documented occasions, living creatures have appeared. Most were unrecognizable, organisms that clearly evolved under completely different conditions. Several appeared to be intelligent. One allegedly attempted communication through a series of geometric patterns drawn in condensation on observation glass. The most disturbing crossover occurred in 2017. Researchers observed the appearance of a human being, a woman in her 30s wearing clothing similar to contemporary fashion, but made of unfamiliar materials. She was disoriented, terrified, and spoke English with an accent no linguist could place. Over several days of observation and interaction, researchers learned fragments of her story. She claimed to be from a world very similar to ours, but with crucial differences. In her timeline, the Soviet Union still existed. A major city called New Singapore dominated global finance, and humanity had been in contact with extraterrestrial intelligence for decades. She had been part of an experiment on her side, an attempt to establish stable transit between dimensions. Something went wrong. She was pulled through, and she couldn't return. The woman was reportedly transferred to a secure medical facility for further study. Her current status is unknown, but her presence confirmed what researchers had suspected. The crossovers weren't random accidents. Parallel worlds were actively trying to reach us. Some had succeeded in making contact. Others had sent scouts, and at least one had accidentally lost a traveler to our reality. The leaked documents suggest that the station's research has shifted focus dramatically. Scientists are now less interested in observing crossovers and more focused on controlling them. They're developing technology to stabilize dimensional passages, create predictable transit points, allow intentional travel between worlds. If successful, humanity could soon gain the ability to step into parallel realities at will, to meet other versions of ourselves, to access worlds where history went differently, where technology advanced further, where answers exist that we've never found. The implications are staggering, but the documents also contain warnings. Not all parallel dimensions are friendly. Some crossover events have brought organisms that were immediately hostile. Some have carried pathogens our immune systems don't recognize. And some have brought information about our own future that researchers found deeply disturbing. The station's research continues to this day, hidden in the Antarctic ice, probing the boundaries of what we call reality. And every day, according to these leaked documents, the barriers grow slightly thinner. Crossover events are increasing in frequency. The dimensions are pressing closer together. Something is changing in the fundamental structure of existence itself. Is any of this true? Are governments secretly researching dimensional travel while telling the public that such concepts belong to science fiction? Are parallel worlds bleeding into ours with increasing regularity? And if the barriers continue to weaken, what happens when they finally break down entirely? Some researchers who study these phenomena believe we're approaching what they call a convergence event. A moment when the separation between dimensions becomes so thin that crossing over becomes trivially easy. They disagree on whether this would be a catastrophe or an evolution, a destruction of reality as we know it, or an expansion into infinite possibility. The ancient cultures understood something we're only beginning to rediscover. The priests who built temples on power spots, the shamans who spoke of spirit worlds, the monks who wrote prophecies of futures they shouldn't have been able to see. They all knew that reality is not solid, it's layered. And the layers touch more often than we realize. Every unexplained disappearance, every impossible appearance, every moment of déjà vu, every dream that felt too real, every memory that doesn't match what others remember. These might be glimpses of the truth, evidence that we're not living in a single fixed universe, but in one possibility among infinite variations. And sometimes, whether through accident or intention, we slip between them. The 10 cases we've explored today represent only a fraction of the documented evidence. Hundreds of similar accounts exist in files, journals, and testimonies around the world. People who vanished for minutes and returned after years. Objects that appeared from nowhere, bearing impossible inscriptions. Locations where the rules of time and space simply don't apply. Maybe the soldiers who watched Sergeant Rivera step into fog saw exactly what they claimed. Maybe Lorena Garcia truly woke up in the wrong universe. Maybe the Tokyo passengers glimpsed an alternate version of their city. Maybe the whistleblowers who speak of government timeline programs are telling us truths that powerful forces desperately want hidden. Or maybe all of these accounts have ordinary explanations that we simply haven't discovered yet. Perhaps human consciousness is prone to elaborate confabulations that feel absolutely real. Perhaps electromagnetic anomalies can create shared hallucinations. Perhaps every impossible testimony has a possible cause that science will eventually identify. But consider this final thought. Every major scientific discovery was once considered impossible. Diseases caused by invisible organisms, continents that drift across oceans, particles that exist in multiple states simultaneously. The history of human knowledge is a history of accepting things that seemed like fantasy. Time travel, parallel worlds, dimensional doorways. These concepts sit at the edge of current understanding, dismissed by mainstream science, embraced by fringe researchers, and haunting the testimonies of ordinary people who experience something they cannot explain. The ancient stone gateways still stand. The power spots still pulse with unusual energy. The experiments continue in classified facilities. And somewhere, perhaps closer than we imagine, other versions of ourselves are asking the same questions we're asking now, wondering if other realities exist, hoping to make contact, trying to understand the true nature of existence. So here's the question that truly matters. If a doorway opened in front of you right now, a shimmering passage into another version of reality, would you step through? Would you trade everything familiar for the chance to see what lies beyond? Would you risk never returning in exchange for knowledge that could change everything? The people in these 10 cases didn't choose their experiences. The doorways found them, but maybe that's how it works. Maybe the passages between worlds open when we're ready. Maybe they've been opening all along, throughout human history, taking travelers who never returned to tell their stories. And maybe, right now, someone is standing on the other side, looking at this world, watching us live our lives, wondering what it would be like to cross over, wondering if we'd notice if they did. What do you think? Are these cases evidence of genuine dimensional phenomena? Which story fascinated you the most? And most importantly, if you could visit any parallel world or any point in time, where would you go and what would you want to see? Write your answers in the comments. We're genuinely excited to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of time and parallel worlds, please leave a like and subscribe. There are many more unexplained phenomena waiting to be explored. Until next time, keep questioning reality.